Hey, greetings. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. What I wanted to share with you comes from about 20 years ago on the Denali Highway. And they were Sabrina and her aunt. She was helping her aunt do some scouting for berry picking. Her aunt always wanted to check out the area because she's seen the tundra and assumed there'd be a lot of blackberries or blueberries or whatever. So they were on their way from the Paxton side on the Denali Highway heading up towards Triangle Lake area, Sweet Lake area. And she was saying at one point in the road, it does this, when you're going that direction, I've been on the road quite a few times, and it kind of does this big S-curve going up onto a plateau. And they just got up to the top of that plateau, and this was fairly early in the morning. Her aunt was a go-getter. Her aunt used to live in Glen Allen, has since moved, out of state, but this is like one of her last excursions with her auntie before her aunt moved away. And I spoke to her aunt. She gave me her view of it, and anyway, so the majority of this comes from what Sabrina witnessed and saw. So as they got up on top of this plateau and they're coming around, they're not too far from the large gravel pit off to the left where everyone parks to go back towards the North Fork of the Golcana. I've been to that same spot. Well, on the right-hand side is non-motorized, right? And there was a little bit of a pull-out, and her aunt took that. Just a slight one. In all honesty, there's quite a few of those little pullouts for people to stop and, photo op. So they stopped there, and her aunt, for whatever reason, in the moment, Sabrina's sitting next to her in the passenger seat, they're in her aunt's little Toyota car. Well, her aunt stops abruptly, puts it in park and shuts it off and everything, and says, "Hurry with me," and jumps out of the car and starts running off into the tundra. Now it kind of drops down, and it's a little up. The road is up on a bit of a rise, and everything kind of drops down, and it's kind of rolling. And then you got the buttes and stuff out there, the mountains. Well, she tears off. So Sabrina just grabs her bucket from the back and her berry picker and stuff, and her little backpack, throws it on, and starts following her aunt. But she couldn't see her aunt all of a sudden. Well, she immediately freaks out, starts running after her in the direction she saw her auntie. Now, when she's running, she's yelling for her aunt. I'll leave her name out of it. It was just her auntie. Sabrina's yelling and yelling, and all of a sudden, her aunt was there, like just standing right over there. And she was like, "Where were you?" And she was like, "I was right here. Why are you yelling at me?" And it freaks Sabrina out. She goes, "You were not there. I was looking. I was panicked. I was running, screaming for you." And her aunt was just bewildered, like, "What are you talking about, kid? I was standing right here." And so she lets it go and figures I was just panicked, and she was probably there, and she just left it alone, you know what I mean? So they start looking for berries, and her aunt went right to a spot, bunch of blackberries, right? And she was real happy. She was like, "I told you, I knew there'd be good berries here. I knew there'd be good berries." And she's enjoying them, they're a little early. And so her aunt was just telling her about berry picking. And as they're talking, her aunt's facing her, and Sabrina's facing back towards the road, right? And, if anyone's been on Denali Highway, it's a hit and miss. There's some little patches of trees here, tundra there, swamp marsh there, mountains in the background. You get a plethora of different environment. The landscape changes drastically from here to there, but it's all the same. Alaska's weird like that. You'd have to see it to understand what I'm talking about. So they weren't too far from Monaghan Flats. As far as, the crow flies, they aren't that far from Sweet Lakes. They're not that far from the alphabets. Anyway, so her auntie is facing her, looking back over her shoulder or whatever, and Sabrina's facing back towards the road. And Sabrina notices her aunt doing this number. Still talking, but trying to look around Sabrina, and it kind of freaked her out, like, what's behind me? She didn't want to get startled by a bear. So she jumps up, turns around, and looks. There's nothing there. And she asks her aunt, "What are you doing? You're freaking me out." And from what Sabrina said, her aunt looked at her almost in a trance, and she said she was looking through her at this point when she had this trance kind of look in her face, and her aunt stands up and says, "Come, I'll show you," and starts walking away. I mean, just there's nothing out there. There was no one, there was nothing, no animals, no moose, no caribou or whatever. She goes, "Come, I'll show you," and they start walking. And she keeps trying to get her aunt's attention. "Hey, we shouldn't get too far from the car. There's bears around, all this stuff." And her aunt was just one-tracked, like just focused on wherever she was heading. Well, it got to a point where her aunt's not answering her, and that's out of her character, right? So Sabrina's like, "Hey," she runs up, kind of half bear hugs her and stops her, and she's just like on autopilot, just trying to tread forward. She kind of half tackles her down, says, "Hey, hey, hey," and her aunt looks up at her like, "Well, get off me, what are you doing?" She said, "You're walking off. What are you doing?" And she looks at her kind of crazy, like, "What are you talking about?" And in that interaction, out of the corner of Sabrina's eye, because where she had fallen over, it would be off to her right that continues away from the road. Out of the corner of her eye, she sees something black just stand up, or just all of a sudden just was there, and starts walking kind of like a half moon around them, right? So she's looking, and her aunt's still trying to get her attention, like, why'd you knock me down? Because her aunt was truly bewildered by this, right? And so she helps her up and says, "Come on, we got to go." And she's looking over her aunt's shoulder. Her aunt turns around and sees the same thing, and they both take off, right? Well, from what Sabrina said, her aunt fell a couple times, was screaming out. They were both, they left the berry pick and all that stuff was just left behind. Well, Sabrina, in her little day pack, her backpack she still had on, she had a pistol in there. She had a little snub nose, 38 special, just a little 5-shot. But it was something in case something's chewing on you, you got something to pop it in the ear or whatever. Well, she's running, and go run on tundra and tell me how easy that shit is. It's not easy. She's running, she's reaching into this backpack. Well, so far all she's seen is this big dark shape, and to her it looked like it was right over there. But once she got the gun out, and her aunt was already winded and said, hold on. Her aunt's down on her hands and knees catching her breath, right? And she has a gun. She points it over in the direction. She notices this thing is big, and it's not as close as she thought it was. It was actually further away, but it was so tall it looked like it was just a man right over there, when in actuality it was at least 3 times the distance as she thought it was, and 3 times the size she thought it was, right? She said it was all black. She couldn't make out any features. It was human shaped. And she said her aunt, in the middle of gasping, was like, it wants to get us, which is creepy as hell. Now, this happened 20 years ago, and Sabrina, she broke down several times on the phone during this portion of what she was sharing. And these are Athabascan women. They're First Nations. And so she gets her aunt up, and her aunt's kept saying that it's after us, it wants us, and she's like, "That's not happening. I got my gun, I'm gonna tend to this." And Sabrina at the time was late 20s, right? They continue on going back towards the car, and she said it was the weirdest thing when her aunt got up off her knees, and she helped her with one arm, of course, because she's holding a pistol, trying not to point it at her auntie and stuff, but looking in the direction of this thing, just standing there. She said it wasn't moving forward. When they moved, it moved. And she said when she turned to look back towards the car, all of a sudden there was nothing around. The road wasn't around. It was just like a very empty place. Her words, empty place. So she stops, and she's like, "Where did we run?" Like, because they were on an upward slope where the road's up there, a little turnoff, and that little Toyota car sitting there. Well, it was, but so she's standing there and she's assessing. She's looking all around, and she turns around, and nothing's looking the same. She said nothing looked the same, but when she turned around to look the other direction, there was a road in the car. So in this fog of things going on, they were literally, out of fear, starting to run off in the wrong direction. You know what I mean? Like, she said it was the most eerie feeling she ever had in her life, because when she was in the midst of helping her auntie up, she wasn't dancing around her or none of that. They were already going in the direction of the car initially, from what she thought when this thing was standing up and doing this half circle thing, right? She said it really freaked her out. So she corrected, course correction, turned around, and they started heading back towards the Toyota. But now at this point, they're quite a bit further away than what she thought they should have been. She said it was really weird. It was like they weren't gaining ground. Like, she said it was real odd. It was like the closer she felt they should be getting, it looked like the car was smaller, and it really was messing with her. Well, while she's freaking out on that, she's keeping an eye every once in a while at this dark figure. And at a certain point, this thing is gone, right? And they're moving along, and she keeps looking around, rubbernecking. Her auntie is half out of breath and just mumbling weird stuff that didn't make any sense. So eventually, things kind of cleared up, so to speak. And those are her words. She was like, the fog kind of cleared, and they were within 50 feet of the car coming up. So they get to the car, and her auntie is just whooped. She's sat down next to the car. She's breathing real hard. She's crying, sobbing. Sabrina's crying and sobbing, and she doesn't know what's going on. And she's looking around again, and way off in the distance, she sees this black speck. And she was like, whatever that is, looks like it's leaving. So she stopped focusing on it for just a moment. She looked down at her. She said she looked down at her auntie. She was asking her for the keys because she was going to drive. She said, where's the keys? She said, I left them in the center. When she said she left it in the center, in that brief time, this thing was just almost a speck is how far away it was. She turned around to look again, and this thing was about 50 yards away, down on all fours, looking at her. She said it looked very, it kind of looked similar to a mix between like a lemur monkey face and a human face, but the nose and the mouth didn't protrude like a monkey's does. She said it was more flat. She said the area around the mouth was very bulbous because of the big teeth, because it kept showing its teeth. She said the skin was pitch black. The eyes, she couldn't see any color. They appeared black as well. And it was just hunched down in this weird, awkward looking way. And she said that she soiled herself out of the fear. And immediately because all this happened real fast, when she saw it and she was startled, she's still holding this pistol. She pops a couple shots. Bam, bam, from this 38. It was unaffected. She doesn't even know if she was properly aiming. She just kind of put it in that direction and made noise with it, basically, right? Thing was unfazed. And it looked like it was focusing on her auntie. And so she's like scooting her auntie over, opening the door. Her aunt's just a mess at this point. She helps her into the car. And she said when she swung her legs in, and stepped back to shut the door, she looked over again, and it was gone. She didn't see it. So she's like, she runs around the car, hops in, sets the pistol down, grabs the keys, starts the Toyota, right? It starts up. She puts it in gear, and as she's taking off, getting onto the road, all of a sudden this truck flies by her, almost wiped her out. And she wasn't looking. She freely admitted it was her fault. This truck flies by. She almost clipped it. Truck veers around, finger out the window kind of deal, and the person kept going. She catches her breath and starts going again after looking. And as she was pulling back out onto the road and heading out of there, she was shifting gears, and she looks off to her left, quasi looking at the rear view, quasi looking out to the side, and she saw the thing on the other side of the road. And she said it was on all fours. Just the rotation of the arms and the legs really freaked her out. But it was not necessarily keeping pace, but kind of trying to get one more look almost. Like, it wasn't really trying to keep up. It was just kind of going along, kind of like scouting or something weird, she said. Again, her words. And she kept going until they got to Cantwell. When she got to Cantwell, the whole time on the drive, she was trying to engage her auntie, and her auntie was just sobbing. And finally, by the time they got to Cantwell, her auntie had calmed down enough and said it was in my head. It was telling me that I needed to run away from you. It was telling me I needed to leave this place. Now, when I spoke to Sabrina's auntie, she said the same exact thing. Same exact thing. Some of the parts were different for her. Like on the retreat back to the car, some things were different. And I asked her, what do you attribute that to? You know, because she's my elder. I was just, asking, what did it feel like to you? And her words, which were kind of haunting, was, I was hearing and feeling what so many other missing people were feeling. And that was like, I was like, oof, oof, ugh. So anyway, I want to thank Sabrina. I want to thank her auntie. She really didn't want to share too much, but she did, she shared bits and pieces, not the whole thing, because she was upset as well. And just beware out there. Beware and understand these experiences I share with you guys are not to scare anyone. They're to open your eyes that, hey, these potential things are going on. Be aware, be as prepared as possible for this high strangeness. I mean, there's so much going on out there in the world. I got no answer for it. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for joining me. Again, I want to thank Sabrina for sharing that, because it was very hard for her to share that. It hit her very deep, and she has never picked a berry since in 20 years. Her and her auntie's relationship didn't fall apart, but they kind of lost contact because her aunt moved away. Moved away unrelated, according to what was shared. It wasn't because of this instance that she moved away, but she moved away for other reasons. And this whole area, there's a lot of activity. We had someone on a telephonic sharing, spotting one of these things at Monaghan Flats, which isn't too far from where this happened. Again, times are different, but circumstances, two women alone, just be careful out there. You never know what the hell you're gonna come up against. You never know. Also, I wanted to share something briefly. This guy, Scott, he reached out to me just recently to warn me about down out over by Lynx Lake and Nancy Lake areas. He told me this last season he was out there in his canoe, been sitting out, he believes it was Lynx Lake. He was sitting out in his canoe just casting, just catching, not even pan fryers, releasing them because they stocked the lake or whatever. And he said he was sitting there. There was not ever a beaver out. There was not ever any other creatures around. People weren't around. It was early in the morning. It was about 7:30 in the morning. And he said a stream of bubbles just came by on the water, on the top of the water, just bubbles like a beaver. But it was so many bubbles, it was weird. He said it went by and then kind of came back by, and then just as it was about 25 feet off to his right, and he's just trying to figure, man, that's either a big beaver or a big something, because you could see the water dispersing, but you couldn't really make out what it was, and he said once it was about 25 feet away, this thing popped up, and he said it was the face like a man, like a caveman. I looked right at him, took a big breath. He said the skin was like a real dark tan, almost like a brownish kind of color. He said it was like a mix between straw blonde and like a dark brown. Like if there was a perfect mix in between those two, it would be that. And it looked like a caveman. Took a big breath, said nose was flat to the face, real wide set jaw. He couldn't make out anything else, just the head popped up. 25 feet away, looked at him, took a big breath, and then went under. And he saw the bubbles take off in a different direction, going back across. He said he paddled as fast as his happy ass could. And, you know, in these lakes, you got a portage from one to the next to cross. He said he had such a hard time once he hit and was dragging his canoe. He had a hard time getting into the connecting lake by the parking lot to get out of there. Now, I was out there with my buddy Carl a little while back. We went further west from there, and that's where that remote AF video was filmed. Same area. And just be aware out there, man. There's some crazies. Can you imagine sitting in a canoe? You're by yourself. You're living your best life, man. Casting, woo! You know, catching little fish in this stream of bubbles. Comes back by. Well, the Scott, the person who shared this with me, is actually current law enforcement. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? Anyway, so I want to thank him for sharing that little brief thing. If you're out that way, just beware the bubbles in the water, you know, and we'll catch you guys soon.